Thanks for coming out. Quick show of hands. Who here is from St. Louis? Like natives? Awesome. Excellent. So please don't break our thing. All right, so today we're here to talk to you about something we've been working on for the last year or so. But first off, it's probably a good idea to kind of give you an idea of who we are with a fun little map. So my name is Jonathan Leek. I'm a consultant with Doherty Business Solutions. My background's in organizational psychology, leadership psychology. I've been doing a lot of entrepreneurship. Started 2 companies, 2 nonprofits, including the local Code for America Brigade.
I'm Laura Ginn. I'm currently employed by St. Louis Development Corporation, which is the city's development arm, kind of a city agency, but also a separate nonprofit. It's all very confusing. For the past couple years, though, prior to taking that position a couple months ago, I was working as a consultant to the city on vacancy-related efforts, which I somehow fell into after about a decade of community-based conservation with a focus on chimpanzees. We can get into that another time, too. But the general themes of GIS, mapping software, and managing projects, I guess, is how we link in here. And we both live in and love this city.
Yes.
Okay. So some context before we move forward. Is this loud? Is it just me? Okay. Vacancy in general in St. Louis, if you live here, you know it's a pretty hot topic right now. For some of us, it's been a hot topic for a while. We're about to top probably 8,000 vacant buildings across the city, and somewhere around 13,000 vacant lots, but probably much more, and we'll get into that a little bit later. It depends on how you're defining what a vacant lot is. So if we add those all up, it's about 15% of all the parcels across the city, but this is concentrated in North City. So if we look above the infamous Delmar Divide, 30% of all parcels are vacant and abandoned properties. South of Delmar, it's only 3%. So this is an issue that is concentrated in North City after decades of disinvestment, redlining, systemic racism. It's taken decades to get to this point. It's going to take us a long time to dig our way out, and it affects everything, not just for residents living in that area, but for the city as a whole. So if you live right next to it, it's going to affect your property values, but if you're a city resident, that's influencing our city's ability to get tax revenue to feed into all services and improve our city as a whole. So how do we go about tackling this thing if we don't fully understand it? This is a big topic lately. So how many vacant properties do we have? Where are they at? How did they come to be that way? What are the steps to get them out of there? This article was actually maybe last week, so this is an ongoing conversation. How do we measure our effectiveness as we employ strategies to deal with this issue and see if we are actually having an impact, moving the needle? How do we prioritize certain strategies in tackling this? So how do we pick buildings out to be demolished versus stabilized or renovated, different treatments for various vacant lots? And what does vacancy really mean? What term are we using collectively as a community to define a vacant property so we're all on the same page as we move forward? So for example, if we were to take a definition of a vacant lot as every parcel that doesn't have a building on it, we'd have about 40,000 vacant lots across the city. But that includes rights-of-ways, people's yards that are actively being used, church property, common spaces, university open areas. And so we need to start kind of figuring out what do we mean by vacant? Is it abandoned? Is it a burden to the city? Or kind of all these things in between, and that's part of this conversation too.
All right. So those of you who are from St. Louis know we have a very active hackathon ecosystem. So almost exactly a year ago, there was a hackathon put on by OpenSTL called Build for STL, which was designed to visualize this vacant housing and start providing some of these answers. And we had a great turnout. Like you can see, 71 people went to this. I pulled this up yesterday. But we very quickly realized that none of the teams were actually going to be able to answer this problem. And the issue was the data underlying the issue. When we got there, it was a series of CSVs and access files with unnamed columns. Things weren't normalized. We didn't know how to join one thing to another. We had column names like parcel 9, and none of us knew what that meant. So how does this kind of thing happen? We hear this question a lot. If you were here at the pre-conference yesterday, one of the most common questions is, how do you help an organization that isn't ready to be helped, right? So these data problems come from a variety of things. But at the heart of it, it's you have their adaptations from legacy systems. So in the case of the city was doing things with paper for a long time, and eventually somebody had a good idea of we should start doing this with these newfangled computers, right? But since there was no formal IT structure in place at the time, they just kind of built it themselves, and so each department kind of just started developing their own thing independently without communicating with any of the other departments. And on top of that, there is no formal change process. So anytime there's a change or an update, it just kind of happens. It's not recorded, it's not communicated to anybody else. And then the folks that are doing this are typically not trained in IT, right? You have somebody who's like Laura's case is like, backgrounds in conservation, right? So someone like her might be in the forestry department and be like, hey, we need a database to track all these lawns that we're mowing. And they'll just put together what they can figure out based off of, some quick Googling on how Microsoft Access works. And then finally, to compound all of this, it's difficult to get strategic support and funding for these things because they're not sexy to average Joe citizen, right? If I'm a politician and I'm looking for a thing that's going to help me get reelected, database architecture is not something that's going to excite the voter base.
I got to jump in there and defend my friends in the city that
They do very good work.
There are a lot of really smart people trying their hardest. Anyhow, we're getting there. So what did we do? We tried this hackathon. We failed. We met each other that day. It was beautiful. And so we stepped out and started this project on nights and weekends, and that's what we've been doing for many months now. So we took these data sets from different departments that had lacking definitions or didn't join to others, or we weren't sure what would join, and just started digging in. And so we've taken 12 different data sets and merged them together, and we've created kind of a profile for every parcel across the city, and we call that our comprehensive parcel data set. There's about 130,000 parcels, so it's pretty small. It's 130,000 rows, and it just gets longer and longer and longer as we add in these different pieces of information from various departments. So from the assessor, we can get what's going on with the tax situation and the assessed value of the property, but then we can pull in about 8 different data sets from different areas of the building division and see building permits and demolition permits and occupancy permits, and there's actually a vacant building survey done by inspectors that can help feed into that condemnation status. And then we go over to the forestry department, which is responsible for maintaining all vacant properties across the city. And they're keeping track of every time a property is mowed or weeded or illegal trashing has to be removed or how many board ups had to be applied to that building. And then finally, about half vacant properties in the city are owned by our city's land bank called the Land Reutilization Authority. It's the owner of last resort. And so we have their inventory information. And we also took what was a PDF spreadsheet that people could look at to find out the various prices of a property if you wanted to buy them, and automated that and fed it into our system with the help of OpenSTL. Shout out. All right. So we pull all that together, and then we ask a bunch of questions about, well, if this department says this, but this one says this, what are we concluding here? So I'm just going to give you one example of what that can look like. That picture probably doesn't show up very well, but here's a building. I think we could all agree it's probably vacant. It's got like a condemnation sign at the front. It's all boarded up, and you can see up to the sky, so it doesn't have a roof anymore. But if we were to just ask the database in kind of the normal, if we were doing this a quick and dirty, if you were like, hey, city, how many vacant buildings do you have? This would not show up. It's not marked as a vacant building. It's also not tax delinquent. For some reason, they're still paying on this. But it is structurally condemned. It has 10 outstanding building code violations, and we have record of, and it's obvious here, that the building division has boarded up that property multiple times. So then we're going to call that a vacant building in our data set.
All right, so for our first attempt, we tried to make use of kind of what we had and what our advantages were. So we were operating without official sanction. Like, we weren't like guerrilla fighters by any means. Like, the city was more than willing to work with us and answer questions. But it's not like the city asked us to do this or my company put me on this. This was just something that we did on nights and weekends because we're nerds.
And people don't answer texts about these things on like Saturdays when we're hammering
No, they
through
don't.
work. So
But given that situation, there are some things that we definitely had working for us, right? Because we are in this weird independent status, it's largely autocratic, right? So when we have a discussion about what defines a vacant building, rather than having to like set up meetings and have drawn out conversations about what one person thinks should be vacant versus another department, we just kind of decided
did it.
and formalized it, right? It really cuts down on the bureaucracy, and at the end, we're able to deliver an unexpected finished product that provides value. So like anything we provide is going to be incredibly welcome, and they're going to be really grateful for because they had no idea it was coming because nobody asked us to do it. There are bad things though. Like I said, the city was willing to answer questions for us and provide insight when asked. Sorry, our timer is disappearing. But we didn't have their day-to-day input, which means we were probably making some bad decisions along the way, right? We're also interpreting the data to the best of our abilities, and we've had cases already where we found out that like, oh, we made this assumption that turned out to be invalid. This data actually represents something other than what we thought.
Can I give you an example?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sorry, but we do have time. So there's a data set called occupancy permits. You would think that that's a permit to occupy a property, but it's not. It's only for commercial properties, and there's something called housing conservation district inspections, and that's occupancy of residential properties. So when we're cross-referencing and saying it shows up vacant, but there was an occupancy permit applied for and approved 6 months ago, so we're not going to mark it vacant anymore. We were using the wrong data set the first time around. Anyway.
We're also kind of held back by limited tools, resources, time, right? So anything that gets any technologies that we decide to use either have to be free, or I have to be willing to pay for it out of pocket, or she has to be willing to pay for it out of pocket, right? Time is also an issue. I have a full-time job, she has a full-time job. So this is getting shoved into nights and weekends, and you can't have all of my nights and weekends. I play Dungeons and Dragons sometimes. And all of these kind of combine into the website itself, when it's done, does provide a lot of value, but it's kind of slow, it's kind of clunky. It goes down if you look at it funny, because it's hosted on all these free services and it's kind of patched together. But one of the things that we learned in this is like, turns out done hides a lot of crimes. So we're going to walk you through the website really fast. This used to be the front page. Now it's buried under a layer, but if you go, you will see these same headings, right? So metrics, map, methods, and more. Nope, okay. Metrics is going to provide you with dashboards where you can look at just kind of raw numerical aggregate data. So right now we're looking at all, right? So we get an overview of how many vacant buildings, how many vacant lots. This number makes me really mad as somebody who pays taxes. Just high-level overview, and there are different ones based off of different dimensions. So if you want to look at just buildings, you'll get a different set of numbers that are applicable to buildings. Same thing with lots. And then we have LRA owned versus privately owned. So the LRA is the Land Reutilization Authority that serves as the city land bank. So if the city forecloses on a building, it ends up in the LRA, and the LRA works to find a buyer for it. If you go into methods, we describe everything that we did. So a big, important part of this was to make this into something that future developers could use to facilitate their work. So that way, if we have that visualization hackathon again, people aren't starting from scratch. So we made sure to document every definition. We provide a data dictionary. If you go to downloads, it'll give you, you can download our data set as a CSV or an Excel file. We also have a even more detailed breakdown of the methodology that is, I think, 18 pages. Is that what it ended up at?
Sorry.
So, but this answers questions like, what is a vacant property? Here's the download page. So you can see you can download the data set. We tell you when it was last updated, because right now that's still a manual process. We'll get to that. we have a data dictionary, and then we have our full methods where we break down exactly what it all works. The heart of it is the map. So this was created in Tableau and is hosted on Tableau Public, for those of you who know those tools. It's not the ideal tool, but it's the one that I had, it's the one that I knew, and I knew I could get the work done quickly. We have an outline of every vacant parcel within the data set, and it is color-coded based on whether it's a building or a lot, and basically our level of certainty, so whether it mostly fits our definition or completely fits our definition. And then you've got filters, so you can look for a specific property by address. Ownership will allow you to toggle between privately owned and LRA. Owner will allow you to look for specific owners, so if you want to track down one person's properties, you can do so. And then neighborhood will let you filter by a specific neighborhood. So if this is too overwhelming, you just want to look at the hill because that's where you live, that's how you can do it. If you click on any particular property, you're going to get a tooltip that's going to provide you information about that property. And that tooltip is going to be dynamic based on the nature of that property. So this is a vacant lot. It gives you the address, who owns it. It's LRA owned, so it tells you how many years they've owned it, whether or not it's available, because sometimes it could be in the process of getting purchased. It might be designated for a use, so the LRA owns it, but they're not willing to sell it for whatever reason. One of the big things we included was the LRA pricing. So obviously the goal of the LRA is to sell these properties, and they have a pricing algorithm to determine how much they charge based off of usage. So a side lot is like, I want to buy the vacant lot next door and basically just extend my yard over there, right? You also have a vacant lot price, a new construction price for I want to buy this lot and I want to build something on it. And then finally, a vacant building price. And we provide links to 2 other resources that might have further information. Geo St. Louis and the LRA website, both of which might be able to give you some more detail, might be able to help you purchase. If you click on a building, you'll see you get something very similar. This is, again, an LRA-owned building. But we have the biggest difference is this plain English description of the building. And this is really important for the average citizen, right? Because we want people to buy these buildings. People are interested in, does it have central air? How many bedrooms does it have? Those types of questions we've put into a plain English sentence to give you an idea of basically how rehabable is this building. And you can explore it, you can select multiple buildings, filter however you want, and once you've found kind of the data set you're interested in, there's a download button in that bottom right-hand corner that allows you to export the map that you're looking at, the raw data, so if you want to import it into some other tool that you work with, you can do that, and that will give you all of the data we have on that site, not just the stuff that's represented in the map, because there's a lot of data behind this that never actually shows up on the map, right? If you're familiar with Tableau, you can download the whole workbook and just go to town on it. I'm sure you can probably, take a whack at it, have fun with it.
So about the same time that we're doing this, things are kind of gaining momentum around conversations of vacancy, and this vacancy collaborative was forming. And so the idea is a group of external organizations, academic institutions, nonprofits, community development corporations that have interest in dealing with this problem of vacancy, and also various city departments that in some way interact, which all of them do, working together on some collective strategies. The city can't solve this problem itself, either can neighborhood organizations or developers. So this collaborative is kind of coming to fruition. The meat of it is working groups that are cross-sector, where we have folks from inside city government and from outside working on things like anti-displacement, reinvestment and reuse, stabilization and maintenance of properties, et cetera. And so there was an event on July 11th that was kind of the kickoff of the idea of this collaborative, and we stole an hour of that launch to reveal the site and gather feedback from that. And so We had about 200 participants there representing 80 different organizations and various types. And so we put this website out there and then broke out into small groups, had everyone break out their laptops and tablets, and we asked just 3 questions. What is useful about this site and this information to you in your job and your attempt to tackle this problem? What is missing from this? And what is unclear or confusing or something that we could work on and clarify? And so we use that time to gather feedback from these 200 stakeholders that work on this issue in the community, but then also had some press that kind of resulted from that and got the word out even more. GovTech, yay. Sorry, I'm still laughing because that guy had a hard time on Channel 5 with his little touch screen system. But so then we started getting email feedback, and people would be like, you've got this marked as vacant, but it's actually my community dog park, or you missed this building next door to me. And so now we're compiling all these case studies where we can actually dig in and be like, why did we miss that property, and what can this tell us about our larger methods so we can refine this moving forward. But aside from that, we can say some good outcomes have come. And so I mentioned there's these working groups of the Vacancy Collaborative, and we've expanded, it's not just the 2 of us, and it hasn't been for months working on this project. And that's grown into the data and analysis working group of this Vacancy Collaborative, where we're going to continue working on this tool and others, but also be a source that these other groups working on vacancy can come to when they have data-related questions or need analysis or visualizations. We've set up a system with the building division where at the same time they've improved their system. They now have inspectors with tablets that are out there and can put real-time information about vacant buildings, whereas we used to do an annual paper survey. And so now every time a building comes up as maybe in our system, we can shoot it over to them and they can send an inspector out, double check, and if it is, mark it. And next time we update our data set, that comes in there. And so we're trying to get that worked out so we can keep the information flowing. OpenSTL has been increasingly involved and is working on some other side projects, and various city departments are more and more engaged. We might be tapping into data sets, well, and already one, that aren't necessarily on like the city's open data portal or accessible, but also getting some definitions clarified and moving that partnership forward. And I wasn't supposed to do this slide, was I?
Oh, your name's on it. Go for it.
Oh, good. Hey. Well done. But we thought we were going to take all that feedback, and by like September, we'd have the next iteration out. And, by the end of the year, it's going to be automated, and we're going to just let a computer run the show and move on. That did not happen. So now the website is not just what we just showed you. It's expanding to be more comprehensive and actually be the landing page for this Vacancy Collaborative, and other tools as they're developed are being and will continue to be added to it. Dealing with people asking us about it a lot from various places. So now if you go to the site, it actually has 3 different kind of directions you can go. More information about the Vacancy Collaborative, the portal, or based on immediate request, a demo tracker. So now there's an interactive map of all demolitions of vacant and abandoned buildings across the city that's updated at any time. You can see ones that are completed this year, that are in progress right now, that are coming soon. And if you click on a dot, it tells you where the money's coming from, who the contractor is. And so kind of getting sidetracked a lot. We're using the information to help prioritize those demolitions. So if we can tell you how many times we've had to board it up or how many times it's need to be weeded and it's condemned, to kind of start to piece these things together, we can start to get a priority list, and then working with other departments to go and ground truth that information a little bit further. But it gives us a good starting point for picking buildings that might need to go versus might need to be stabilized. Definitely started a larger conversation about what it is we call a vacant property. Our definition was pretty tight. We focused on properties that represent some sort of burden to the city. So if there's a lot that doesn't have a building on it, but we've never had to go remove trash or weed it or mow it, fine, who cares? Someone's maintaining it. Should we be concerned about that as a city? And so we only counted those that required some sort of investment resources from the city itself. Still me, good. So other folks are already kind of taking this information and doing side projects, and as we continue to refine the methods, we hope those projects will improve as well. One example is there are studies from other cities that tell us the kind of try to quantify the impact on property values of living near vacant properties. And so as we really hone and define where these are, we're taking that information and applying those methods to St. Louis to get an actual representation of what this is costing us, both as someone who lives nearby, but also the city as a whole. And fielding requests from different government departments and academic groups that are like, what is this? Can you explain it to me more? How can I use it? And so we'll see what comes out of that.
All right, so where do we go from here? First is we're working on refining the portal, automating all of the data ingestion and processing, and providing an API. A lot of you are probably thinking, why didn't you start with that? Well, those parts are hard, and we wanted to provide immediate value to the city. And it turns out we can provide value to the city without doing the hard parts. We want to expand to new data sets, completely unrelated to vacancy. So we've been exploring a public-private partnership in order to facilitate redoing all of the city's data architecture, not just vacancy, but across 10 different departments. And the idea is kind of twofold. Like, one, it's going to massively improve how things function in the city. And from like the private side, like if as a citizen that wants to help the city, this is a one-stop shop for improving everything that the city does, right? I could work on vacancy, I could work on crime, I could work on unemployment. But if I fix the data, I'm not going to fix any of those, but I'm going to empower the people that know a lot more than I do to be more effective, and I can therefore improve all of them. And so to that end, my company Doherty is now putting together an inception workshop to kind of scope out what that would look like and how much work would be involved. And we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we fund that, right? How do we make this all happen? So if you're interested in doing this, there's parts of this that are easy, and there are parts of this that are kind of hard. Turns out it's really easy to get individual people excited and willing to help you help your community. You just kind of have to ask, and people will step in and help. Also helpful, all of the data that we built this off of are public. So we're not having to jump through hoops to get access to data to make this happen. We're having to work a little bit to understand it and to make use of it, but the data's there. It's just in CSVs on the city's open portal site. We can just do whatever we want with it. And we've been able to use our independence to really push this forward and drive this and make it happen. Stuff that's a little more difficult. If you try to tackle a civic project, it can be kind of hard to find or define that project, right? The only reason I was able to work on this is because I happened to meet Laura, who understood vacancy and the data involved really, really well, and was able to guide us through the domain expertise required to do this. It's difficult to gain support and funding. It's one of the reasons we did this very duct tapey version to start with, because it's easier to gain that support and that funding once you've established the value of it. But again, for Joe Citizen, it's going to be really hard for them to understand the importance of a proper data architecture, a proper data infrastructure underneath. And a lot of times people just kind of assume it's better than it actually is. When our new mayor came into office, the first thing she asked for was to see all the dashboards. And the employees just had to look at her and be like, those don't exist. Like, you can ask these questions, you can ask a question like, how many vacant buildings are there? And it's going to take us 2 or 3 days to answer that, and the answer is probably not going to be with a high level of confidence. So what are the lessons we've kind of learned from this? One important one, people don't read documentation. So we have a 12-page methods document, and still the #1 question that we get from the website is, why is this building vacant, or why is this building not vacant? We're working to create better visualization, to make that more apparent, but if you're going to work on something like this, probably from the start, keep in mind that nobody's going to read anything you write. Give them a cartoon. All right? Sustainability is really hard. We've all been to hackathons, and this was brought up during Sean's talk yesterday. hackathons are a great way to start a project and never finish it, right? You work really hard on it for a weekend, and then it just kind of evaporates. Getting that sustained work done over the course of months, years, is really, really difficult. And don't underestimate it. And if you can get that part right, you can mess up almost everything else. And you'll still produce something of value. That increased support and collaboration as the project grows and as you kind of prove the value comes at a cost of decreased productivity, right? So since that launch, my development time on the website itself has gone to almost zero, because anytime I have to work on this project, I end up working on strategic level issues or meetings, talking to the press. Like, there's only so many hours I can give to this, and unfortunately, those are the things that are taking up time now. But you have a potential greater impact, right? So all that time with the press seems like a waste of time until you realize that this website's only useful if people know about it, right? And so every time we show up on the news or in the Post-Dispatch, the website's becoming more useful, even if it's not improving, right? And then it's easier to ask for refinement than consensus. So we bootstrapped this. It's, like I said, very duct tapey, but the important part was we did it, and then we asked for refinement rather than from the start, hey, we want to do this, doing requirement gathering, trying to build consensus about a definition for vacancy, right? So a simple thing like how do you define vacant building, that can be just hours upon hours upon hours of meetings and arguments and email chains. Or you can just pick one, make one up, and use it, and then when people have problems with it, kind of discuss from there, but then you're starting from a starting point, right? It's the difference between editing your paper and writing it from scratch. Just get it down. And probably the most important thing is there's a better way to volunteer, guys. Everybody in this room, we're all technical people, and we're all, I'm assuming, civic-minded. Like everybody that's in this room, I'm assuming you're here because you want to learn how to make a difference in your community. And it's very easy to volunteer at a soup kitchen or Habitat for Humanity or whatever and do just kind of the manually labory parts. And those are providing value, but we can do more. We can just same way this technology has allowed business to scale, we can allow our volunteerism to scale. And so I would encourage everybody here to look for ways that you can use the skills that you have to improve your community. And now, I don't know how much time we have left.
Early.
We're early? Questions? Yeah?
So I'm involved in Hack for LA, which is part of Code for America, which is
Mm-hmm.
like this is kind of related to.
Yep.
And we did a kind of, not a similar thing with buildings, but a similar like, let's come together as a community and figure out like a big problem in our city, and for us it's homelessness. So one thing that was really interesting to me was you were saying that before with the vacant building problem here, people would go around with clipboards and that's how they would record the data. So in LA with homelessness, it's very similar. There's a census on paper. On paper, we have great data about the homeless population in Los Angeles, but the way that that data is collected is the same way. They have volunteers walk around at night with a clipboard, and it's really not very reliable. But one of the discussions that we've been having is like, how do we actually convince these, like the city, to change the way that they do it? I'm curious if you guys got any pushback on that when you went to the city and were like, hey, we could do this better.
Right, and I think that was the important part of asking for refinement instead of buy-in from day one. So every city's going to be different, but I think what was really important in our process was not going to the powers that be until we had a product to share and saying, what do you think?
Yeah. So
Could this be useful? Do you want to be involved? Do you want us to launch this just as citizens doing a side thing? And they were like, no, we want in. What more data do you need? But it wasn't until we had something to look at.
So
Otherwise, it's kind of a waste of time to have these hypothetical conversations about what you may or may not provide.
yeah. So in a more concrete example for your use case would be, rather than coming to the city and asking for a change in process, come to them and be like, we built you this app. We want you to use this to collect data now because your papers are annoying.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any effort to involve volunteers, sort of crowdsource some of the data collection that you have here?
Yeah. We get a lot of like, what if we want to click on a property and input our own information or like upload a photo or say, found one, put it in the system. And right now we're really focused on how do we automate what we have? Because this is, we're always chasing our tail, right? So property ownership changes and inspections come in and condemnations in and out. And so what we're trying to focus on right now anyway is a constant single source of truth of where every vacant property is that's updated automatically. And when we get to that point, then how do we feed in input and kind of ground efforts, if that answers your question. So hopefully yes, but we want to get past this phase 1 first.
Yeah.
Oh, wrong finger.
Question on the slide though thing is,
Oh, thank you.
project controversial for possibly leading to gentrification and displacement?
I'm going to answer that one.
Go for it.
No, we have this conversation with people a lot, actually, about, if you're just taking all the information that there is and turning around and pushing it out into the world without any kind of framing or context, and even the definitions, though, could be a framing, and it's used in ways you don't like, does that mean you should have not shared the information? From a conservation background, people talk about, should we not share where the chimps are? Because then like poachers could go and find it and, drop little nukes on that area. And this is the same conversation, like information sharing that can have negative consequences. Do we then hide information? And I think the approach that we've taken is information needs to be shared, period. We need government transparency. And at the same time, though, I will say personally we have feelings, and so like I serve on the anti-displacement working group of the Vacancy Collaborative, and that's another conversation that's happening at the same time, is if this information is used for redevelopment, reinvestment, how do we ensure that's being done in the right way? Do you want to add anything to that?
I was just going to talk about the anti-displacement group. The Vacancy Collaborative as a whole consists of several different working groups based off of different subject matters. We're primarily talking about the data and analytics group right now, which mostly serves to support the other working groups, but one of them is the anti-displacement, and they are specifically looking at that problem because we recognize that that is potentially a problem. We don't want that to happen.
But we also don't want 2,000 acres of vacant land to sit and be a public health and safety and crime and quality of life drain on the residents that it's been impacting for decades, so we have to find a way to balance that too, and we need this information regardless. Are we out of time, or do we keep going? Okay, one more.
See a hand in the back.
To what extent are politicians involved in the process, and does their involvement help, does it hurt, do you wish they were more involved? Is the project sensitive to their involvement?
Yeah, Mayor Lyda Cruson has been incredibly supportive of this. The hackathon that originally kicked all this off was kind of at her request. This was the subject matter. And as we've been going about it, like she's been showing this at when she talks about this problem with the press. She's been including us as part of her strategic plan going forward. She's a very busy woman, so like the politicians tend not to get involved too deeply. But from a strategic level, having politicians that are in support of this project and are making it a priority makes it easier for all of the non-politician city employees to give us their time, to give us their resources, because it's part of this administration level initiative.
Okay, I think we have to stop though. Thank you.